Hello, everybody. It's Surayya Walters, and I'm the host of The Purposeful Professional. Today, I'm asking you, what does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to be multi-talented? In today's social media age, everyone is a creator. We have many tools at our disposal, even artificial intelligence, helping us to create books, art, songs, or graphics quickly and seamlessly. It can seem as if the artist way, for those who are familiar with the book, the cultivation of talent through sustained practice over time, is obsolete. As an entrepreneur, I'm inspired by artists. In fact, I consider myself to be an artist. I can relate to the undying passion for your craft and a willingness to psychologically suffer for your creations or visions to manifest. These thoughts and musings brought me to the subject for today's episode, The Artist Way. Now, what can we learn from the artistic and creative people among us? How does this relate to multipotentiality or the development and expression of many talents? Lastly, what insights can art provide us as 20-somethings or people of any age when planning our careers and lives? For this episode, I am joined by Milena, an artist, writer, researcher, and multipotentialite herself. I admire her creativity and bravery in pursuing her artistic visions. We had a great conversation about what art means to us and how its power can be channeled for good to create a life we are passionate about. Listen now to The Artist Way, Multipotentiality, Adulting, and the Path to a Meaningful Life. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Purposeful Professional podcast. Today, I have on a really special guest. She's a multipotentialite. She's an artist, a researcher, a writer. This guest really does it all in terms of the arts. So today, our topic is the artist way. We'll be talking about multipotentiality, adulting, and what is the path to a meaningful 20-something life. I would love to introduce my guest, Milena. Milena, introduce yourself to the people on the podcast.
Hello, everyone. My name is Milena Beretsko. That's my full name if you need to know that. I use she, they pronouns. And as Surayya just said, I do a lot of different things, and I'm happy to talk more about it.
Yeah. We're here to talk more about it. So I just want to give you all like a recap of just who Milena is. So she works on many projects from creative and research-based backgrounds, but she also is in that 20-something range that a lot of us are in, where we're considering like, what am I supposed to do with my life? Okay. When you're multi-talented, you're balancing many different careers and many different choices. So she's thinking about social psychology, writing, research, what her path is. So I really would love to have a discussion on all of those things, what it means to be a multipotentialite, how you're navigating your early 20s, but also like, what is a meaningful life for you? So first, let's start with like, tell me about some of the projects you're working on, your writing, your research, like what are you working on right now?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things I'm working on right now. I truly have an ongoing list of what I'm trying to accomplish and, trying to make progress on all of these projects at the same time. So I work very much in parallel lines when it comes to like the projects I'm starting and, trying to get to the finish line. So currently I'm working on a poetry collection. So the very first draft of the collection is complete. Now it's very much just polishing the poems and making sure like every word for me suits and that I like them. And second step is going to be, trying to publish that. So firstly, making the layout and making sure I actually like the way it looks on page or like on screen, but, actually having it reach an audience. So that's one thing I'm working on. The second thing I'm working on is a book that I was very stuck on for quite some time, which meant that I wrote a play. The play won a contest. I just returned from the writing residency in the Czech Republic. So that was a very interesting thing. So now I'm working on the second draft of the book. It's a dystopian novel set in the future. So it's set in New York, beginning in 2050. And it spans years forward. So that's the book I'm working on. I'm working on 2 different research studies that are my own and plus some other research studies at my job. I mostly focus on hierarchies, belonging, intersectionality, and recently I'm very interested in intersectional stereotyping and on stereotypes embedded in spaces. So I've been working more on designing this kind of research. Yeah, I also like I now been training a less I've been taking dance lessons. I've been taking tango lessons, so I'm learning how to dance tango. I love dancing. Literally, the list is very long, but those are like the top of my mind right now. The book is definitely a big part of it.
Yeah, so I feel like this thing about like that's exactly why this episode is called The Artist Way, because you're like taking yourself, and you're expressing yourself in so many different areas. Like I really do see you as a multidisciplinary artist, because it seems as if you really just have that vision, but you look for different creative mediums to express it. I'm curious as to how you went from a book to a play though, because I
Mm,
feel like oftentimes we go into writing, because I'm a writer too, knowing like, hey, this is the self-help book, or this is the novel, or this is the play. So like how did you go from a book to a play? That's pretty interesting.
sure, yeah. So I think the very first thing I have to mention is writing a novel and writing a play are require very different mindsets, I would say, and very
Mm,
different attention skills. And what I mean by that is a play is driven by characters and particularly driven by dialogue. Sure, it is also about, how the stage settings are and how the play itself, like how the very stage would look like. But the majority of it is how the characters speak to one another. What is the conflict in the play? What is the conflict in the conversation? What do they each want? So it's way more fast paced than a novel is when you can spend so much time describing a room or describing someone's face or describing someone's hands or something like that, right? So I was stuck on the book when it came to like pushing the plot forward, and plays is essentially all about plot. It's like how do you um how do you communicate the needs of characters and what they want and how they're trying to get there through each scene. In a play, it's like if a scene doesn't propel the plot forward, it shouldn't be there. In a book, however, you can really spend so much time, like many pages, describing just someone's mannerism. And the audience, the readers, what they actually do like is to get into your mind and kind of have a glimpse into how the writer thinks, right? So because I was stuck on the book, what I focused on the major plot points. So in that
mm,
case, I kind of created the very skeleton of the book by writing the play, like the play version of the book. Another thing I will be working on is when I do publish the book, and I hope that's going to happen before I begin grad school. Um, I want to, at some point when it's going to be published already, like I want to actually produce it as a screen, like a screen rendering, as in, a feature film. And I want to act as the main character, as Nadia. So I want to take on the lead role. So, I already have written a play from the book essentially. Um, and I will then write a screenplay from the book as well, and I'll act in it too. So like that's my plan
mm,
for the future when it comes to this particular project. But so in that way, I don't think it's easy switching between mediums, but I do think that switching between mediums of writing, because you're stuck, is very helpful. Like before, also when I was stuck, when it comes to playwriting, I have also switched to poetry because it's really
mm,
about like simplifying it and not like again when you think about form. Poetry is short form. It's one idea you're trying to develop, wrap in words, and present to the audience or present to your closest, I don't know, beloveds and all that. Play is a little bit longer, but is again all about characters, how people speak. A novel is a major piece of your mind.
yeah. Okay. So you just broke it down. That was like intro to English literature 101. Like you broke down all the different styles of writing. And also what I loved is you talked about the mindset behind each style of writing, like how you have to have a different mindset. I always say poetry is weird for me because I like it, but I always gravitated towards like opinion editorial, like
Mm,
journalistic writing, about like
mm,
facts and like things that are happening in the real world. So I think it's great. And I think you really gave us a almost like a masterclass introduction on the different ways in which creativity can be expressed through writing and the different mindsets you take when you write. I think there's this book called like Seven Thinking Hats. And I always say, like, as a writer, you're wearing a different thinking hat all the time. Um, with you even being in the play or being in the movie that you wrote, I mean, that's also the definition of like building a table for yourself. So props to you for being like not the type of artist that just like, hey, I have this script and I'm just going to give it to someone else. But I also see you taking control of your vision too. And I think that's also a form of art, like wanting to take this vision that you spent so much time writing and bring it to life. Because I do see some artists where they're like, hey, I just wrote this thing, or, I just wrote this play. And it's like they're giving it to someone else. But I love the fact that you want to take ownership of it, from beginning to end, because I think that's also so important. So thank you for introducing us to all of that good stuff. I want to know, and I think the people want to know, how do you balance multiple interests? I was dizzy hearing everything that you're doing, and I'm doing a lot too. So I know, like, I'm trying to figure out, how do you balance all of these interests? How do you keep the creativity going as well? Because I think a lot of people, creativity is static for them. So like, how do you balance multiple interests and with such dynamic creativity?
Sure. Thank you for asking that question. I think I'm very intellectually driven as a person,
Mm.
and therefore I really follow my curiosities. So in that case, whatever that is at the moment, I will not rest until I know and I find the answers. And the reality is that it's not easy to find the answers. So one of the terms I describe myself is a truth seeker. And truth is also like, I don't want to say it's subjective because it's not. It's neither objective truly, but it's that the truth is dependent on like the facts in the story, which means that it might morph. And I don't think people like to think about it in that way. But in that sense, like I want to kind of keep seeking what truth is, and for me that means doing that through writing, through research, like finding out the answers. And you ask me how do I do that? Um, I feel like I am a very, it's hard to satisfy me as a person in general. And in that sense, I have very high threshold for like intellectual stimulation, for like emotional engagement and all of that. So in that way, like I really seek like the highest possible level of the challenge. And writing is incredibly challenging. And so is research. But the reason I do these things in parallels is because the reality is that I work a full-time job as a behavioral research fellow, as a researcher, right? So in that way, I get to exhaust my critical thinking, my intellectual, like when it comes to like psychology and in that realm, which is very specific in the way you're supposed to form your questions, the way you're supposed to write about your results. And then because I exhausted that mind, or like that part, like portion of my mind, then that creativity is free flowing. As in, now I really get to my own creative writing and focus on characters, on people, and like writing the narrative that is storytelling, that is very highly lyrical. That's how I write. So in that case, it's really about like exhausting ways of thinking for me. And then when that is exhausted, then that's why I turn to dance, because it's like being in a moment and trying to like replenish my energy levels through not thinking but like being in my body and like being in a moment. So I think all of those sustain the other, and that's how it all kind of works in tandem. But because I do these different things together, then they allow me to switch between different like thinking modes and creativity. I wouldn't say seamlessly, but rather easily.
Okay. No, I hear you on that. And I feel like it's funny that you said that your behavioral research day job actually makes you exhaust your critical thinking. So by the time you're writing, you actually have this like fountain of creativity coming out, because a lot of people would say, my day job takes everything out of me. I mean, I know you've heard those people who are like, my day job just takes all my energy. I can't be creative anymore. I just don't have it in me. And I think it's great that the way that you're framing your mindset is like, I do this thing during the day that I'm also passionate about, but I exercise a different part of my intellect. And you talked about being intellectually driven and in search of truth. When you write, you're able to express different parts of yourself as well through your writing. And then when you dance, you're able to, like you said, be and be present and embody your own essence, in real time. Dancing, you're responding to music. It's such a sensory activity. I grew up dancing, so I know. And you get out of your own head to be able to really be a good dancer, and you start feeling things. So I really love that. I think it's great that you're able to like integrate your identity into your work. And from there, that sustains the creativity. I think I can relate to that too. I want to go back to that point on truth, right? You being a truth seeker. Where did that come from? Like, what is the significance of truth in your own life?
Mm, I think when I started really, I would say calling myself that, or like thinking of myself in that way, it was because I was finding out like snippets of my family story that were just not
Mm,
aligning. And in that case, it was all about like narrative, as in who's saying it, who's telling the story, and what is being omitted, and why is it being omitted. So in that way, for me, it was very much like trying to piece the fragments and understand, like, all right, so I might never get to the truth, or like I might never get to the complete story, but I am at least approaching it, or like looking at it from the distance. So in that way, I think it applies to everything. Like research question in psychology, it's all about the specific context, specific methods you have selected. It's about like your study pool, like who you have as your participants. Like, sure, you are finding out what like the hypotheses you were testing. You're finding out, you're getting closer to the question you wanted to test, but it's all under very specific circumstances. And that's how I approach truth, that it's very highly dependent on circumstances, and you actually will never be able to like complete the story because there's always going to be a piece missing. Like there's this saying that history is written by the winners, like by the victors. So in that
mm.
way, I am more interested in the history of like the oppressed, like history of people who have been discriminated against, but also just simply omitted because of, I don't know, they were deemed less important, they were deemed less human or not human at all. Like that's what I'm interested in, because in that way, you're getting to the story people didn't want to tell, and then the question becomes why. What was so dangerous about it? What was the power dynamic? Like, what was the power imbalance? And why was it so great that we cannot even allow the truth to come out? So I think, yeah, the beginning was definitely like rooted within my family story, and that's how it started, and it keeps going.
Yeah, no, I love how you talked about it being rooted in your family story, which I mean, honestly, our heritage is like the bedrock of our truth. I feel like that's one thing in your life that you can never fake. You can never fake where you come from. They always say like a tree needs its roots to grow. So our
Mhm.
heritage, where we're from, our family, our lineage, that is really our truth in its purest form. So I love the fact that you talked about family and you connected to that. I think when you said truth teller, that resonated a lot with me. When you said intellectually driven, that resonated a lot with me as well. I wouldn't even say I'm in a quest for truth, but I feel like I'm on this quest for authenticity to the highest level. And that to me includes like following my dreams and sometimes speaking truth, sometimes making people uncomfortable, in the realm of progress, in the sense that I want to really continue to progress, create things, and go out there and do things that actually lead to systemic change. So I would say I'm also in search of something. And I love the fact that you talked about like defining yourself that way, alongside that intellectual curiosity, which I relate to, like the feeling like I have to always be challenged or I'm stagnant. So I have
Mhm.
this thing as well where I always want to be challenged. And I think that I think about these big values, like these big picture values all the time, this justice, this truth. What does it mean to really exist in a just society? What does it mean to be true to yourself and true to others? So I think that a lot of that is about happiness, is about authenticity, is about really the artist way. Like, how do you express what you feel and who you are to the highest level? Because I think that's what it really means to be an artist. So speaking about all these deep topics, I want to know, like, how are you comfortable with this multipotentiality, right? Like this research side of you, this dance side of you, this playwright side of you, this novelist side of you, in a world that often forces us to choose. I feel like we live in a society that you have to be one thing, even from career days. Like we grow up with these career days, and it's like, oh, put this one career on the board, or we want you to present on this one career. Whenever you say you want to do multiple things, people think you're crazy. I remember in high school, I had like 10 careers on my like career day sheet, and people were like, well, I don't know where you're going to find the energy to do all of this. So like, how are you comfortable with your like multipotentiality, like being multi-talented in a world that still, even in 2023, wants us to stick to one path?
Yeah, I think firstly where it all started, it wasn't like, I woke up one day and was like, you know what, I'm gonna do these three things. It was
Mm,
never that. It just somehow naturally my interests have like solidified into three or four pillars, and they have been research, art, and community. And community meant also writing, it also meant research, but it also meant like organizing college and meant doing a lot of activist work. So that's kind of how it all flows together for me. But so it was more so kind of grouping my interest into these three pillars that became very distinct and significant, but also just, I don't know, pronounced, I would say, like very easily noticeable to me as a person at some point. But it all started, from my upbringing again. I was growing up in Poland. I was raised in Poland, where, like, my middle school was very hard. I was in a linguistics program, and so I was taking, geography, physics, chemistry, Spanish, Polish, English. So, like, and the way it's emphasized in Polish curriculum is like you ought to be the best in everything, and not everyone can do that, but like I was rather successful, I would say. So in that way, it was ingrained in me from the very beginning that I can have I can be an A student in English and in physics, that I can be really good in biology, but at the same time, let's say like I suck in geography or something like it, but I had really good grades, so that meant that I had a very good command of those skills and those subjects simultaneously. So in that way, from the very beginning, like I think people call it being like a Renaissance person or whatever. I don't really care about the term that much, but it's more so from the beginning, it was very, very deeply ingrained in me that it's not good enough to just be good in one thing. Like you ought to be a well-rounded person. So in that way, from the beginning I knew that, you know knowing one thing isn't enough, that I ought to know way more than that, and that knowledge is transferable, and something you learn in physics actually does apply to biology as well. It's not like it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not in silos, and each like fulfills the other and each fuels the other. So in that way, my curiosity has grown exponentially during that time in middle school, and then I moved to the US during high school, so that I was, big culture shock, big change in general when it comes to like I'm speaking English on a daily and I'm learning all these specified high level terms in biology and English. That was strange, but so in that case, I still had this mindset of I ought to be good at everything, and it was coming rather easy to me in that way. But I wanted more than just that, so I started like seeking my own interest and like looking into things, and how do I feel comfortable, or how do I make myself comfortable in a world that demands me to be, have an expertise in one area. I refuse to have an expertise only in one area, because I refuse to only have one interest. And if I did, I wouldn't do well in one area of my life if I was only doing this one thing. I think it would lead to exhaustion. I think it would lead to boredom. I think it would lead to me burning out very quickly. Because I do different things, they allow me to sustain this as a practice and as a lifestyle. And in that way, well, I think one way I do conform to this one narrative story, or like one expertise demand or something, is that, during job interviews, I carefully craft my narrative saying that I've done this research. I've been doing research for 4 years right now, actually a little bit more than that, that I have experience in different labs. No one needs to know that I have been also organizing and writing a book and writing plays on the side. That can be omitted, because people do question my value and my worth and my knowledge when they find out I do so much. Because in their mind is this like almost like a threat question of, well, but how does she do it then? Like, how involved or like how dedicated is she, if she's doing so much? And my answer to that is, well, you should not worry about that. Like, I'm going to present you this very neat packaged box saying those are my skills as a researcher, and just you take that, and maybe one day you'll find out I wrote a book. And that's how I'm
Mm.
trying to, not trying to, that's how I've been doing it. Because I do think I also reserve other identities as my private layers, I would say, so people at my work don't need to know that I write. When they find out they do, well, maybe they'll be interested in it, maybe not. But that's their choice. And it's also my choice to keep it a secret or not, or keep it private. Because again, like I don't need to become this like flashing sign saying I am this and that and I do this and that. Like, no, you don't need to know everything about me. And I get to choose what my story is.
Yeah, I mean, whoa, okay. That's very deep. But that's also great for you because you can like, I don't want to say you can conceal, but like you're good at that strategic element of like, I'm showing you what I want to show you in this moment. So I know my time to flex my research. I know my time to flex my writing. I know my time to flex any other art that I do. So I feel like you're very strategic in how you go about it, which definitely eases the discomfort of, you applying for a job and there's 10 different roles, 10 different areas on it. People often don't see that as being someone they want to hire or be affiliated with. So I'm glad that you learned that like in this world, you can find ways to still be able to pursue every path by strategically placing yourself or strategically maneuvering and speaking about your experiences in certain ways. So I really do like that. I feel like I relate to this thing that you have where you don't want to choose. That's how I am too. Like I don't want to settle in any area of my life. For me, it also started in childhood. Funny, it also really started in childhood because I was interested in everything from I was dancing, I was in the drama club, but I also was in the debate club, but I also was
Mhm.
student government leadership. So
Yep.
I was doing pretty much everything. And I think I'm the type of person, I just find something I'm passionate about and I go towards it. Um, I feel like for all of us, we deserve to have more in our lives than just being one dimensional and having one path. So I get what you're saying also about the burnout because it's like if we if we continue down a path that is not right for us and we become this pointy person. So people say like pointy people are people that have this one path and one thing that they do all the time.
Mhm.
If you're not necessarily like passionate about that, you won't have that cyclical replenishment that you talk about, where when you get tired of this, you turn to this. And it almost like gives you a surge of energy to do something new after you've been doing something for a long time. So I think that that's a great way to kind of reclaim yourself by admitting, which you did today. Like, I have this cyclical relationship with all of the sides of me, and I go from one to the next, and it gives me energy to switch. That's how I'm wired. So I think that I like that. A part of me is like, oh man, I feel bad that you have to even like conceal certain parts of yourself. But then a part of me is like, I'm happy for you that you have that strategy because every single artistic person does not do that. You probably know like the heart on your sleeve artist, creative type. They're out there. They're really out there and they're going hard for their thing, whether it's singing, dancing, whether it's cooking, fashion design, whatever it is, however they express themselves, they go hard for that even if they have a day job, the day job is like, well, I see you on social media and I see you doing this and I don't really approve of it. um that's been happening where people have been fired from their jobs because of influencer work, because of different work that they do outside of jobs. So the landscape is really becoming tough for people who are multi-potentialites, but I'm glad that you have that. I feel like way to cope, like way to cope with this renaissance world that you want to build for yourself. You know how to present yourself in different categories and different areas. So I like that. I think that's
Yeah.
cool.
I think one other thing I want to add to that is, you know, I think a lot about the creation of alter ego and like
Mm,
when artists select a different stage name and a different pen name and all that. And I plan to do the same thing. I plan to have my book published under a pen name. And the reason being is because I genuinely don't want anyone conflating the fact that I, how do I say this? Like, the writer in me is one person, then the researcher is a different person because they require very different presentation, very different skills, very different thinking mode. And sure, it all exists within me as one individual, but I do get to separate them. And I do separate them, as in, as I told you, like, when I exhaust my intellectual critical thinking, then I turn into creative writing. So in that way, I think it's another like technique to just say that you get to lead multiple lives in one, and I think that's just so freeing, and I love that. Another thing I wanted to say is, another downside to being, as you said, a pointy person is that the society would then tell you you are this and you have this one particular role and name and a set of expertise, and then it's ignoring everything else that you are. That's one part of it. Second thing is, let's say your job isn't going so well. Let's say that you're really struggling. Then your entire sense of self is completely ruined because you have then this idea that like you're not good enough, or that everything is falling apart because everything you've known is this one career path or this one set of expertise. And that's just, I think that's a way to like self-destruct. It's almost self-sabotage in my mind if I was to just dedicate my entire life to only one path, and then if something was to go wrong, and things do go wrong, right? Like that's just like how life is. God forbid there would be like I would reach some very high level, and I will reach some very high level, but let's say that someone was ready to break me at that moment. Then like let's say I lose everything I thought I was. And that's, we have to recreate yourself. If you have multiple paths, you kind of, kill one alter ego, you have five left. And maybe that's not the best way to think about it. Maybe that's not so encouraging, but I think I do think it's freeing. You get to play in real life. You get to play different characters. And maybe that's also me coming from an acting background and, having been on stage and having presented different characters. But I love it. I love living this way.
Yeah, no, but I think you're kind of alluding to this thing of the integrated self, right? So you have these alter egos, you have this pen name, but at the same time, that is how you express that authenticity of like, this is who I am, and this is who I am, and this is who I am, and I'm all of these things. And simultaneously, you can still be none of those things, right? So you can still be just a being. And I think that's the authenticity that I want a lot of us to achieve, especially in our careers. When you talked about people like being a pointy person, being a person that is an expert and not having any sort of imagination or creativity outside of that, that's something that, number one, has been happening right now with the layoffs. I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with the tech layoffs, like how many people got laid off at the tail end of last year. I think they said like, what is it, like 13% of the tech sector got laid off. So an entire American sector that, tech talk, I don't know if you know about like the TikTok, the tech people on TikTok, they're always talking about like, work in tech, da 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 da. And it's become like something that people heavily identify because we live in such a technological and digital age. People identify with being a computer software engineer person, or they identify with being a techie person. And in one email, that was taken from them. Boom, you're laid off. So where do you go if you've been denying parts of yourself to please your employer, which that's happening, right? I don't want to seem as if I'm too artistic. I want to seem like I'm a businesswoman, or I want to seem like I'm an educator, and I just want to be this one-dimensional version of me to please my employer. When you get laid off, you're depressed because you're like, man, I have destroyed my own ability to see the possibilities because of the job and the role that I was in. And that's something that, I hate to say this, but as someone who studied organizational behavior in college, I know that like workplaces, their job is to make you think that work is your life. Like that is their job. So they don't really want you to be everything that you can be. And I think you were talking to that when you said that people really just limit themselves when they just have one path. That's why people talk about side gigs, side hustles, and all this other stuff, because you got to do something for you. Like you have to do something for you. And I feel like that's That is so important. Another area I see that in is with retirees. So I know a lot of people who are retired. I want to have some retired people on the podcast too, because even though I'm young, I want to learn from them. Like, what did you regret about your career? And a lot of those who have retired regretted that they didn't take those chances to like write a book, even though they're an engineer, or they didn't take those chances to, really go to fashion school and learn to design clothes because that's their passion, even though they were a teacher. Like they did not take those chances to expand the self. And I think for people like you and I, that's your goal, is every day to expand yourself and to learn more about yourself. And I really love that about you, especially because I feel like you're in that realm where you really just care about expanding. You're not shrinking yourself. Like you care about everything I can do, let me do. And that's attributed to your growth mindset, the way that you see the world. So I really do like that. And I think that's a strength that I feel like more people should learn, especially those who feel like their job is who they are, their role is who they are. Like we need to get out of that and see the possibilities,
Yeah, I don't want to downplay it though, as in like the reality is living the kind of life we do is exhausting.
Yeah.
Like I clock in 8 hours a day, and then like I am expecting myself to work additional six. So like the reality is it's really hard, as in it's very exhausting, and it demands a lot of focus and dedication, and just like knowing why you're doing that. So I don't want to like critique people who have one job and like that's all for them, because if that's how they like it and that's how they see their life to be most fulfilling, like by all means, like that's your choice. What I don't like is, when, as you said, the job makes people kind of mold themselves into whatever the company wanted, and that is my issue. As in, I think not having any hobbies outside of one's job, not having any hobbies, or like as you said, like side gigs or just passions in general, whatever that passion is just a killjoy. Like it's a killjoy, and it kills creativity. It kills one's, I think, sense of purpose in life outside of job, because the reality is that you know one's purpose in life is not a particular company. That's just never how it goes. Like it's greater than that. It's, let's say, someone who wants to start a particular app or a website or whatever it is, like a program, a business that is, the mission of a business is solidified way before it has a name,
Mm.
way before it gets to have a brand, so in that sense, that's how I think purpose for individual works too. It's greater than the company name, it's greater than a university name, it's greater than the job title. So I just don't want people to like mold themselves into whatever the job thinks they are, or even harder, even worse, whatever the job wants them to become.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And totally, I agree. First of all, I agree with that too. When you're doing a lot of things, and we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, being like so intellectually driven, a lot of that is what? Intellectual. It's in the head. So it's not as practical or as down to earth as someone who is like, okay, I know my energy, I know my limitations, I can't do all of these things. So it really is a path that you have to choose. And there's pros and cons to both. I would say it depends on where you see yourself. Do you see yourself being um like a Oprah Winfrey, like having a lot of things going on? Or do you see yourself being like a Barack Obama, like you pursued politics, that was your passion, and you want to pursue it at the highest level? So in that way, there is benefit in being a pointy person, because it's like you really, sometimes if you really, really are tapped into one area, you can become really successful in that one area. And both people that I named, Barack Obama and Oprah Winfrey, super successful, but different routes to
Mm-hmm.
success, different ways in which they express that success. Obama wanted to be president of the United States. That's like the highest law of the land, right? He wanted to be the executive leader of the United States. Oprah wanted to be a journalist, a mogul. She wanted to have a magazine and a TV show and a TV channel. Like, she wanted to be a spokesperson for this brand and that brand, a host, do all the things she does because of what she wanted. That was her vision for herself, to be diversified in that way. She didn't necessarily want to be president of the United States, which is something that you have to dedicate your entire career to. Like you go from being an attorney to sometimes being a district attorney to being a senator. Like there's a very, very linear path to get to the top. She's just like, I want excellence in many different fields. So I would say both people are excellent, right? But they go about it different ways. So I would tell anyone, like, you just got to go about it the way that you want to go about it. Whichever way you feel led to, go forward. Because sometimes I wish I was more practical. I'm not going to lie. Like, I think being so intellectually driven, it can be very hard to it can be hard to sit down and think, okay, how much energy do I have? Because the vision is so motivating for you that you keep on going forward with that vision without thinking about your energy. And I would say that's the number one thing that my mom gets on me about. She's like, you're not superwoman. You have to rest. And I'm like, dang, I'm 22 and I don't know how to rest.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. And I heard one of my favorite artists say, her name is Chloe Bailey. She said, like, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And I'm like, oh, snap. Okay. While I love that energy, I also need you to like actually sleep. So I feel like it's one of those things about like being young and driven. We feel like we're invincible. And sometimes our practicality isn't necessarily there. So I can't blame my peers who have this one job and they work that one job and they vacation like on their free time. I don't do that. So sometimes I'm like, what am I missing out on? Like, what am I missing out on being so driven? What am I missing out on being so multifaceted? It's tough. You get what I'm saying?
For sure. But I want to push back on it a bit, just a tiny bit, as in you talked about like Oprah Winfrey and talked about Barack Obama. And I'm thinking one thing that really stands out to me is that firstly, Oprah has pursued a path where she had to create these opportunities for herself. Versus like Barack Obama, you have a very set path. So you definitely have to approach it differently. And you talked about like, you have to dedicate your entire career to become president of the US. Well, yeah, that should be so because you're the main organ of the freaking country. So like that is, I think that's a good thing, right? But I do have very, very grand goals, visions for myself that both include creating opportunities for myself and things that, roles and um, I don't know, I suppose positions that don't even exist yet, as well as those that are very highly situated. And I know the exact name I want to take on when it comes to like that particular position in the global arena that is very structured. And I am going to be working toward all of those. The reality is that, again, it's working in parallels, which means that I'm not putting all my energy into one line or like, one path, which means that it will take more time. It will be slower progress because I'm working on these things simultaneously, which means that to make bigger progress in each area, surely I have to, commit to it more, which means I have to dedicate more time to it. But with that being said, what I've learned through organizing is that if you burned out too quickly and you are only a good organizer for a year, well, good, you did something. But the reality is that people need you for long term, which means that you need to know how to sustain your effort. You need to know how to sustain yourself, which means that it's actually your job to prevent the burnout. It is your job to take care of yourself because otherwise you will not take care of the people. You know, if you cannot, like there Tony Kate Bambara, she talks about, get your house in order. If you don't have your house in order, you don't have anything together. As in, you cannot help other people if your own house is not in order. So that's kind of that's a very mindset. It's people don't want you seeing dying on the street. People don't want you like, breathing out your last breath when you're trying to protest for something. No, like your role is to do this as long as possible so the change is sustainable, because change takes a long time for it to arrive and it requires a lot of effort. So in that way, when he said, Chloe Bailey says like, I'll sleep when I'm dead, well, I used to think this way too. And don't get me wrong, I've gotten so incredibly sick, when like my body was demanding me to rest, and like I don't want that anymore. I don't like that. So I'm doing my best to rest whenever, not whenever I feel like I have to, but like rest proactively, which for me is also dancing, which is also like sport, because that's my way of resting my mind, which is, in my opinion, is actually more important than resting my body, because that's just how I am as a person. But yeah, I just want to kind of emphasize the fact that it is really our job to take care of ourselves so we can become, that great grand person for the community. Like you said, like, starting your own business and all of that. For your business to work, you need yourself to be there and keep that work going. So if it's going to take a longer time, if it's going to take slower progress but steady progress, that's more important than jumping up the spike, like exponential growth and then falling down. That's just
Yeah.
not how it goes.
Yeah. And it's funny that you talked on the topic of like starting a business, because I feel like that's when I had to learn how to care for myself. Because literally, like when you're founding something, and you know this, you're founding, you're creating, you're taking ownership of a vision. If
Mhm.
you're not okay, nothing is going to happen. And I
Exactly.
literally told my volunteers for my nonprofit the other day, I was like, hey, I'm taking a mental break. And I put it in the chat, and I didn't know how. It was a public Slack message. I didn't know how it was going to be received. I was like, you know what? I'm taking a mental break. We're in the launch season. I'll be running the sessions each Friday, but I just have to take a break from operational duties during the week. And everyone was like, hey, thank you for modeling healthy leadership. People reached out to me and said, thank you. And I think that was a moment for me in my vulnerability. I met you in like Humanity in Action.
Yeah.
So the fact that we got there means that we're a certain type of person. You get what I
Yeah.
mean? Like we are, you're a doer, you're out there, you're doing, but sometimes people just want you to be human. And I think when I said that, a lot of people reached out to me and they said, well, I'm so grateful that you said that. That reminds me that I can be myself in this space, because the leadership is not trying to uphold an image of perfection. It can be hard for me as a multi-potentialite, whatever, like person who does a lot of things, to even take a vacation. And I was like, you know what? I'm doing a staycation. I'm tired. I was going through some stuff in my personal life where I was like, you know what? I got to take a break. And I also, like you, had the sleep when I'm dead mindset, where it's like, okay, well, I'm young. I got to maximize my youth. I always say we live in a Forbes 30 under 30 culture. Everybody's trying to get there, especially in our 20s. And the way that some of us work, while great, we have to ask ourselves, is it sustainable? The world needs all your gifts and all your talents, all of the writing, the research, the dance. The world needs that. So preserve yourself so we can get that, so we can get that from you. So I love that message. I really love that.
Yeah, I mean, so to kind of counter Chloe Bailey's argument, Little Sims, one of her songs, she says, do you want to live? I think that's how it goes exactly. Like, do you want to live 5 minutes? Or, like, she talks about time, as in, like, don't do this for 10 minutes. Like, you need to stay alive for longer. So, I wonder what the exact quote is. I want to, like, say that. But it's in her song called Dance. But yeah, so she's the one who's like, talking about, like, you're not here for a brief moment. We are here for a brief moment, as in Earth in general, but you're not supposed to burn yourself out. You're not supposed to just die because you want something so badly so quickly. Like, that's just not it either.
Yeah, I think that's really deep. That's really, 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 that's very, very deep. And I think that's something that we all have to think about. Like, where does rest, happen for someone who is so talented? And then on the other end, you talked about Oprah and Obama, like the demand for their talents was super high. So a lot of the time it's like, not only do you begin to go out there and do a lot of things, you get this fellowship invite, you get this program invite, you get this scholarship, you get this graduate school acceptance, you get all these things all at once, because now it's like the world is demanding you to be in 10 places, 10 different places all at the same time. So it's one of those things where I've had to start like turning down opportunities, and I never thought I'd get to that point where I was like, hey, I'm just too busy right now with this that I can't do this. So a lot of it is prioritizing,
Yeah, for sure. And also, I think for me in college, I was doing so much. And for me to say that, well, it took a lot of growth to realize that I was doing way too much. And I realized that, I was doing a lot, not because I wanted to, but because I have created myself as this kind of person who can.
Mm.
And the fact that you can doesn't mean you should. That's one. Second thing, the fact that you can doesn't mean that you should be doing the things people demand of you because you've done it before. Like, I can organize 2 protests, doesn't mean I have to organize 10. I've organized whole summits, like AAPI Awareness Month. Of course, not alone, but the point is, like, I was one of the main drivers of that. And in that sense, like, sure, that's amazing, but I don't have to do this every single year. The fact that I did it once doesn't mean doesn't mean I have to make every protest an annual thing. Doesn't mean I have to make every workshop a weekly recurrence. Because again, the fact that I can doesn't mean I should. And at some point I had to really evaluate of how do I want to spend my energy? What is most important to me? What is most beneficial to me? So as you said, priorities. And having so many goals, like I even have to prioritize within my goals. What is most important to me within the next 2 years? Is it being advanced in tango, or is it finishing the book? So because I have so many ideas, and the reality is that you have to choose, because otherwise you're spreading yourself too thin. I found a quote. So Little Sims said in the song Gems, do you want 15 years or 15 minutes? Do not tire yourself out. 1 foot out of line and you will be ridiculed. And that hit home. And I used to listen to this album all the time when I was driving, in particular between like my college and New York City. So like I knew this album in and out, like every single line.
Yeah, now I'm learning about Little Sims. Okay, thank you
I
for
love her music. She's from
putting me on.
Chicago, and I think I'll be moving out then,
Yeah.
which I'm like, damn.
Oh shoot! Thank you for putting me on to Little Sims. Now I gotta listen to
Oh my
Little
God.
Sims, because that's very deep. But it's true. It's like you have to prioritize and understand. I always say I can do a lot of things, but I can only focus very deeply on one thing. And I
Yeah.
think that's the reality of like doing this. I have to focus deeply on one thing. I'm trying to write a book, and I'm gonna have to take some sort of break from what I'm doing now to focus on that. And I might spend 3 months writing the book. Cool. And then I can go back to everything else. But I can only I feel like I'm that type of person. Out of all of the dishes I have on the table, there can only be one entree. There can only be one like main meal that I'm eating.
Yeah.
And everything else is like, I'm just sampling for inspiration. But there can only be one real main thing that I am consumed with. And I agree with that. Like, it's about prioritization. 100%.
But I also want to
Yeah.
say, like you said, 3 months, give yourself more time. And I'm being very real here. Writing a
Yeah.
book, not easy. It's going deep within yourself. And it's like traversing inner landscapes that you're just discovering. So it takes a lot of like sinking in to yourself, which is just hard work, because people around you, you don't see anyone doing it because you're not supposed to see anyone doing it. You know what I mean? As in, it's such
Secret process.
private activity. It's really, you have to have so much solitude at bay, I would say, that it's really hard to notice anyone else doing it. And it requires a lot of vulnerability, requires a lot of staying true to yourself, and just really kind of getting to know yourself before you even put the words on page, right? So yes, I want you to focus on the book, but you don't have to necessarily give yourself a timeline on 3 months, because you might be more frustrated not reaching that in 3 months, and you wouldn't even notice how great of a work you have already accomplished, like how many great things you've written, because you like haven't accomplished a goal, which I've been there. And I'm like, Milena, girl, sit down. Like, you're writing a play, and you're writing a book, and you're doing a full-time job, and you're actually somehow socially active. Like, give yourself a break, cut yourself some slack. Again, as Little Sim said, do you want 15 years or you want 15 minutes? Because your glory shall shine, but not like, it's not like, you're not headlights, that just flash and this is it. Like, it's really being about like light that is sustained.
Yeah, no, I agree. 100% I agree with that. It's one of those things, because I saw this one guy. So I I'm tapped into the entrepreneurship world. And I saw this one guy that was like, start a production, not as a production, start a publishing company with $400. And he talks about how he's kind of like a lazy writer. So he will take out his iPhone and record himself speaking and then transcribe that. sends it to an editor, and then the editor makes it into a book. So I'm here like, and this guy's like, I wrote my first book in 10 days. You know, we live in a very like microwave. We talked about this before,
Yeah.
fast food art culture, where it's like, okay, I'm just trying to create a product to sell. So I'm balancing like the businesswoman in me that's like, okay, well, you need to put that book out there. Everyone is asking for it. Boom, put it out on time. With the, I think with the artistic side in me, that my best writing took a long time for me to think about it, took a long time for me to look it over, took a long time for me to ask myself if I like it, you know. So I think it's balancing, and you know, we live in the fast food art generation. It's balancing this thing of like putting out content consistently and at a fast pace. And you can sound impressive and say, oh, I wrote this in 30 days because I've heard someone say that, versus actually releasing a masterpiece in the 15 years or in the long term. And I think a lot of the time we feel like, especially with social media, we like to hear overnight success. We like to hear they just sat down and wrote in 30 days and it made a lot of sense, you know? So that's what I see all the time, because I'm not in the conservatory or like the like very artistic circles. So I hear that all the time of like, you know, you're missing money. You're missing out on money. Get your ISBN code, get your business set up and get it on Amazon in 30 days. Like I hear that all the time. And a part of me is like, okay, I'm writing a self-help book. So it's not as deep as a novel. But at the same time, it's based on my own life, which like reconciling how do I use my life as a story for others to learn from? How do I like create parables out of my own life? That's tough. So I got to remember, I'm not doing the like how to be rich in 10 days book. Nah, I'm writing about my life.
Oh my gosh, there's so many things that came to my mind as you were saying. So many things. And one thing I want to say is you talk about masterpiece, writing a masterpiece. Yes, because the reality is, oh my gosh, I read a ton. And it's the most heartbreaking feeling when you read a book that you were anticipating by a writer that you love that reads as a first draft. I've been there and I was just pissed out of this world when I've been waiting for a book and I read this book and it really reads as a first draft when I'm like, I know people wanted you to publish it. I know people were waiting for this book, but you didn't do your best. And I can feel it, I can sense it. And so that's like one aspect of it, as in like, I don't, more than right now, I'm no one. And I mean, I will be no one my entire life. Whatever people put on me, like that's their own identity, like their own perception of my identity. So, like, but right now I have no audience. Like, I don't have readers to impress because I don't have fans or anything like it. Which means that however long I spend writing my book, like no one is aware of it because no one knows when I started. No one knows what my process is like. Which means that when I release that book, it really ought to be at its best stage. And only from that moment on, right? Like I have someone else to impress or something like that. Which is then difficult, but it means that I really can take and you can take as much time as you need. So when you release that book, you're not just like dipping your toes in the world of being a writer or like in the literature world or self-help books world or wherever it is. Like you're entering it with your full force. That's one thing. Second thing, my favorite books, they have taken years to write. The artist Celeste Ink, she wrote Little Fires Everywhere. She rewrote that book 6 times. To rewrite a book 6 times is like you're telling me that you wanted to publish something so good it never met your own expectations and you finally let it go. I applaud that so much. Then Maza Mangista talked like her book, The Shadow King. It took 8 years to write because firstly so much research, but that book is so incredible. She's she's the Nobel laureate in literature, and like for some reason, but when you were talking about, like all these productivity gurus being like people who are recording voice messages and having someone else do their work. Well, firstly, you're doing the work, so you need to give yourself more time. Secondly, in the world of people who are demanding fast food art, as you're saying, or just like very quick product, I really want to be the one who is like polishing it. Like I want to be the artisan, not the manufacturer. When like I'm taking my time with what I'm creating, So it's best when I'm publishing it. That's one part of it. Second part of it is fast food art. It does read as a fast food art. There are barely any meaningful works being produced out there. Don't get me wrong, there are some gems. Like there truly are some gems on social media and people who really create good work. But the reality is that because there's so much pressure to produce fast and get it out there, that thought, the depth of thought is just no longer there. So myself, as a person who is writing, who wants to produce work and like publish books and all that, I want people to pick up the book and be like, they're stuck on 3 pages because they keep thinking about the ideas I brought up. Like I want every sentence to be carefully massaged, so it's like, someone is reading it and they're like, damn, she really took her time. She really put in too much thought. Not like,
Yeah.
it's not about the word count, it's not about the page count. It's like, what does the book represent? So in the world of the artist, and as you said, like in the world of fast fashion, I want to be like Rihanna. People are like, girl, take your time. We're waiting for your album. That's how I want to be. I want people to
Oh,
be
yeah.
waiting. You know,
No,
like
be the Rihanna.
exactly.
Yeah, let me
That's what I
tell
want to
you.
be. I'm telling you, like, she has her Fenty like lingerie line. Man, gorgeous. I'm a big fan. All of it. Beauty line. She's done so many things, right? And now it's like, now it's her choice to release another album and come back to like that other, talent of hers. It's there. It's not like it hasn't
Mm,
gone away. It's still there. It's more so that she's choosing other things, right? So like people are literally like waiting for an album and like, will she drop it or not? Well, I hope so, but the point is that like in a way she doesn't give a shit because why should she? It's her life, right?
mm,
That's how I want to be.
yeah.
When I decide to drop that book, I will, It's not like because people put pressure on me, and I encourage you to do the same. Like when you feel most ready, when it comes to like, I am stepping into the space, now this is my time, do that. Not because someone was like,
Yeah.
well, you ought to finish in 30 days. You do it. If you want to, go for it.
It's this thing, it's this thing that it's this thing that people have. And I also think it's this pressure to say I'm an author. We honestly, like every time I go on LinkedIn, we live in like a multi-hyphenate culture. I will see people say, I am a spiritual guru, CEO, author,
That's
speaker,
ego.
journalist, real estate agent,
That's ego,
boom, and
truly.
I'm a psychosomatic healer. Yes. Like you're all these things all at once, and I'm a psychologist, boom, and I'm an attorney, boom. And we list all those things that, as someone who has been, I don't want to like put myself out there, but as someone who has been an aspiring writer from I was a kid, people are looking on me and they're saying like, hey, where's that book? So-and-so's an author. Why aren't you an author yet? And it's this thing of like, am I in a competition with them? But we
No.
are competing nowadays to be everything. So as much as, I remember we were talking about like the people who work their jobs and they work that one job. That is probably like a boomer mindset. Most of Gen Z is like how we are. We want to be everything all at
Mhm.
once. So the amount of people that have a 10-page ebook and are calling themselves authors. Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, who's a writer versus who's not, like, and I don't want to gatekeep writing. You're a writer even if you write a children's book. But I see a lot of people using like the children's book or the 10-page ebook as a way to say I'm an author. And what that does is that reduces your credibility. So people don't see you as a Celeste Ng. They don't see you as that. They see you as a, oh my God. I'm not going to disrespect an author on here. But they see you as like how to become rich in 10 days, or like they see you as an Amazon Kindle. And there's nothing wrong with that. But an Amazon Kindle ebook author versus someone who actually is author artist. Like they spend time in the wilderness. I mean, they have like these wilderness cabins that you can do creative work in. Like they spend time really pushing themselves to their creative limits. And I think we're not really doing that anymore. And that's not even just in writing. That's in so many other areas of art, even business, the amount of businesses that are coming up. I consider business to be a creative activity at its highest level. You're creating something that's not there yet, right? So the amount of businesses that are coming up that are carbon copies of other businesses. I see everyone is building a consultancy all the time. Like, I think I'm like, wow, we're in a society of fast production, but not really taking time. Even within the music industry, like people are saying, it's some funny thing that's happening where a record executive said R&B is dead, like R&B music is dead, and people were like, R&B is not dead. But what he meant is that, like, even in the music industry, artists are not taking the time to study. Back in the day, you wanted to be an artist, whether any sort of performing artist, you had to go to the conservatory for years and study music, study acting, study dancing. I remember I wanted to be a dancer growing up, and I was like, I don't know if I can make it through Juilliard because they're tough. They're going to make me practice all the time. And I just think we have this thing where TikTok can make you go viral in a day. You don't really want to put in the work. So we're at this thing where we want the titles and the recognition without the toiling. And I think that's a major Gen Z struggle. I would say we struggle with that. Like, we want to be all of these things without really putting in any work, you know?
There's one other aspect of it that is very hurtful, because then the work that actually gets to be seen is not the work that's the best, but the work that has the most followers on
Popular.
TikTok, on popularity, right? That's one. So in that case, like, that really good writing, or like really good, I don't want to say good art because that's just so arbitrary, but the art I would want to see and be the, not saying the mainstream, but at least be spoken about more, is overshadowed. And it's like, by that work of a TikToker or something like that, who gets to have a book deal within a week, when like someone is getting rejected by 30 publishing houses. And I do think I am rather good at finding gems when it comes to writing, because I do go outside of like the mainstream, outside of like the New York best-selling like author lists, and I find really good reads and like beautiful work. But there are not many artists nowadays who really get recognized for how good conceptually their art is, like how much thought there was put into it. Right now, as you said, fast food art is all about relativity, no, being relatable,
like relatability. Yeah.
So like being relatable, and like, kind of putting into words experiences that are so universal that people just needed to hear it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I am hungry for more people who are really thinking outside of the box, who are really who are really taking their time to examine the unexamined, and who are not afraid, as I said maybe earlier, like to speak the truth, to call the ugly ugly, and like describe all its layers, and not just like speak to the choir.
Yeah. Woo. This discussion was just, this was it. I think this discussion was so special. I had, I'm a planner, so I had my questions, but I was like, you know what, let the flow take over. And I feel like we really got to the meat of all of these things, all of these things, and how we find this sense of purpose through this maze of multiple talents, multiple choices, multiple paths. How do you find this sense of purpose? Going back to that New York Times bestseller, a lot of us feel like if we aren't validated by the highest standards in the culture, whether it's New York Times, Pulitzer, MacArthur, I met someone who said I'm going to interview them for this podcast, they're actually a MacArthur Mac PEGOT aspirant. So they want a MacArthur, a Pulitzer, MAC, and then they want an EGOT, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar. And I'm like, whoa. I don't even have that standard for myself, because that's a lot. And I'm going to interview him. He's a great person for this podcast because that's what he's aspiring to. So we live in this society where it's like, if I know that the TikTok followers needs to come for my book to sell, even if my book is trash, let's keep it real, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be on TikTok. I'm going to brand myself as some guru. I'm going to make these TikToks every day. I'm going to build my followers. And I'm not going to lie, like, charisma has a huge element of who's successful, right? When people feel like they can relate to you, they're more likely to support you. Consumerism is it can be very it can be very superficial at times. So it can be, the guy that I know that wrote that book in 10 days, he said, well, I don't use any fancy language. I use a language I grew up with. And, he's from, I think he's from like Baltimore and New York City. So he writes with like a urban influence. Not, all of it is grammatically correct, but you can tell he uses the New York City slang. He uses the East Coast slang because that's where he grew up. And people are attracted to that. So I think like the relatability sometimes and that charisma, that X factor can sometimes overshadow an artist that might be more to themselves or secretive about their process. But what I would say is in the long term, the artist who is more diligent will win because they're developing skills. It's like the tortoise and the hare all over again, right? Like the hare thought that they were going to beat the tortoise because they ran faster, but the tortoise was steady. Because I feel like the artists, the rappers, the singers, the dancers, like the people who go down in history for their creativity, the visionary entrepreneurs, they took their time. And they sped up in some areas, but they knew when to slow down. And I think that's the key. You have to know when to slow down. Even if you're a fast person, you have to know when to slow down to really do something of value. But yeah, I think we're going to need a part 2 for this one.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing, which is you're talking about like, you will do what it takes as in like to have your book become a bestseller, like, and all that. I wouldn't and I won't. And I want to have book tours because I love meeting people. Also because I have this thing planned that I will be dressing as I think the characters would dress in a book. And I just want to like have fun with it. So like maybe the audience will get it one day. Anyways, point is, I really want to connect with people. I really want to get to know people. So I would love to have book tours and like, go to bookstores and like talk about the book and meet readers. But what I was going to say is that you were talking about like the hare and the rabbit, and you talk about like, the people who are more diligent when it comes to their passion and their craft, they'll always win in the long term. What I was thinking is, you will laugh at this, and you will laugh at this, but it wasn't until last year, and I'm dead serious about this. It wasn't until last year that I learned that you actually get paid for publishing a book. I didn't know. So
yeah, you do.
Yeah, I didn't know. So in that sense, I was writing because my aspiration was just for people to read it. I had no idea that you get paid for it. Like I just thought that, the publishing house offsets the cost of printing. So that just tells you a bit about like how big of a dream that is. If like I was doing all of that and I keep doing all of this, and I just thought it's just about getting your words out there and not even like getting paid for it. So when you talk about like best-selling authors, like, yeah, it is about money too. But I had no idea about that. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who, didn't think about it. Maybe other people figured it out early enough. Maybe it was very late for me. But point being is that that's how dedicated I am to the craft. Because I just love that so much that I want to just share the work.
Yeah, cool. Okay, this was definitely a conversation. So I'm going to ask you what I ask everyone before they go. Like, how is this conversation resonating with you today? What are you taking away from this conversation?
I think that the words that are ringing are for sure fast food art, fast art. That's really what gets me thinking about what does it mean to sink deeper and take your time with creativity? What does it mean to be still and actually give yourself the time? Because I think being an artist of any kind, you need to believe you have time on your side. If you don't, your art will come out with much pressure and limitations. So that's one thing that I will definitely take away. The second thing is kind of the drawbacks and also the positive sides of being a multipotentialite, and what does it mean to sustain a practice. And just for myself, thinking when enough is enough. And I mean it in a sense of, maybe 3 lines, like 3 parallel lines is just the perfect balance. Like maybe it shouldn't be more ever. And simply thinking, as you talked about, like the main course or like the main entree on the table, just like thinking, what does it mean? As in, what does it mean to make one of your goals a priority, and how to sustain the others when you are clearly prioritizing one thing over the others. So yeah, a lot of thoughts boiling for sure.
Yeah. All right, y'all. So that's what it is. Thank you for tuning in. All right. Take care.
Wow, I am listening to this and I am so dumbfounded by this conversation. There are so many lessons that were really hidden in this conversation. I feel like this is an episode that I'll invite you to listen to over and over again. Milena was definitely the perfect co-host and guest for this episode. I appreciate her perspective and even her willingness to challenge my own thinking on what it means to really live an artistic life and have any artistic career. From our discussions on fast food art to considering the time it takes to create something truly wonderful and impactful, to even considering Gen Z's overexertion and trying to be everything for everyone. This conversation truly covered it all. This episode was flawless and the conversation was at its highest level. I'm truly excited to continue exploring these topics and more as we grow together through this podcast. All right, now everyone, take care and thank you for listening to The Purposeful Professional. My name is Surayya Walters and I'm your host, and I'm wishing you a purposeful and passion-filled career as always. Until next time, bye.